Okay, this is compositing, but it's not compositing in the sense that you might be more familiar with thinking about in terms of explosions and getting putting people in unusual environments and things like that. But this is compositing in a technical Final Cut Pro sense, and it looks at these things called operators. Now, operators are the function or the mathematics, if you want, behind a particular blend mode. So this is where two layers are blending with each other and combining to create a composite image. Now, an operator is just the way that you describe how that blend mode is working in terms of very simple maths. Now, operators take either one input or multiple inputs, and these are generally your layers, and perform some sort of a function on those layers or those inputs or the values contained within those layers, and assign the result to an output image. So if you think about another way of looking at composites is you take two inputs such as two images, composite them together using some sort of an operator, and end up with your output composite image. Now, multi-source operators specifically describe composites between two different inputs, two different layers. Okay, and two different layers can also be two identical layers. It's just the fact that you have more than one layer being used. Now, you are actually familiar with operators, whether you know it or not, if you've used any kind of an add composite or a multiply or an overlay or anything like that. Now, what I'm going to just talk you through now is the actual what's happening when you're using one of these operators, how the actual effect relates to the operator that describes that effect. Now, this is the simplest one that you can look at. It's an add operation. So it's an add operator where output O equals A plus B. Now, the best way to imagine this happening is that you've got your two layers as two images, so two frames of video that match up with each other because one is over the other in a track in the timeline. So we've got input A in a clip sitting on top of input B in a clip, layered on top of each other in the timeline in Final Cut Pro. So each one of these frames that you're looking at has a grid of pixels, and as these pictures are placed over each other, the corresponding pixels will be added together to get a new value, and that value is going to describe one pixel within the overall output image. So this is an actual real abstraction of an add operation where the images are real and the actual result is real and the actual numbers are all real. So if you think about input A is placed on top of input B, there are pixels that match up with each other, that correspond with each other between image A and B, directly above each other. So input A, I've taken that pixel, it's kind of a dark red pixel on the outer edge of that star, and that pixel is made up of three channels, and those channels have RGB values. Okay, so this particular input image is 191,223,0. Those are the numbers that describe that particular pixel. Now, the image below it has those clouds on it. I've taken an area of blue from the sky to match up with that pixel from image A. Its three channels are visible there. The RGB values 66, 130 and 20 are simply added together to give you 255, 153, 220, which give you the pixel within the overall output image. So the overall result is visible on the right hand side, but each pixel has been added together to give you that result. Now, operators such as add take two sources, O equals A plus B, adds them together, and what you will get is you'll get the two images mixed together, but that the output will always be a brighter image than the sum of its parts. Because you're always adding numbers together, you're always ending up with a brighter version of that number. Okay, so that's why this image looks the way it does. This is a single source operator called invert. Now, invert uses the operator O output equals 1 minus I, or the input. So essentially what this is doing is it's subtracting the RGB values, which have been converted to floating point decimal numbers, from 1, and you get the negative result. So if you imagine that image there containing blacks, greys and whites, if you imagine the blacks equals 0, the greys equals 0.5 for example, and the whites equal to 1, when you subtract those from 1, the blacks will now be the 0. 1 minus 0 is 1, so you'll get a white. Where the whites were in the original image equal to 1, 1 minus 1 equals 0. You'll get black. So that's why it flips them around using this invert. So the visual result of an operator, the invert operator, is that you get a negative image back from as a result. The last one that I'll show you is called multiply, and this is one that we're actually going to use. So multiply is going to take the operator O equals A multiplied by B. So what this does is it takes your image, takes a second image, converts the RGB values of one of those to a decimal number, and then multiplies that decimal number by the corresponding value in the other one. Okay, so what you're doing now is you're multiplying. Now, because it's always going to be somewhere between 0 and 1, if you're multiplying the original image by 1, it's going to retain the same color that it always had. But if you multiply it by 0, it's going to make it black. And it's going to be a sliding scale in between 0 and 1, making the image either black or a darker version of the original image. So it's a little bit tricky to get your head around with initially, but I'm just trying to explain the idea behind why you get the visual result of a blend mode such as multiply as opposed to add. So when you multiply these together, you're always going to get a darker version of the image, except where the image was white, in which case it's going to stay the same. Now, that's a very simplified version of what operators and blend modes do. So when we go into Final Cut Pro, you might be able to use that information as a means of creating color adjustments. Now, I'll just show you a very simple one in the sense of multiply. Let's find a clip here. So this harbor track. Now, I'm not saying that this isn't a nice shot because it is so kind of faded in the background, but I'm just using it because it's a nice example to demonstrate how we can use multiply, for example, to darken portions of this shot while leaving other portions light. So I'll duplicate this, just hold down Alt, click and drag, and then pull it up there. Now you access the blend modes through control clicking on the clip, going down to composite mode, sorry, is what they're actually called in Final Cut Pro, and I'll change that to multiply. And what you see then is you see a very different result. So if I switch off this layer, you'll see the original. When I apply that multiply blend mode to a duplicate of that layer and place it on top, you'll see that you get a much different effect. Now you can go back and you can kind of lessen the effect of that by adjusting the transparency of the top layer. So you can see that you can bring it back towards the original like that. So there's lots of scope there to play around with blend modes and color correction filters to get effects. Now you also have a lot of other effects that you can play around with in your let's see now, glow, for example. Glow has an effect called bloom. Now what you may need to do in this case, if I want to apply my bloom effect to the overall composite here, I'll nest the sequence. So I'll go up to sequence, nest items, and I'll call it Harbor Composite. Click OK. Now I have a single composite version of those two clips. I can get my bloom, drag it on that, and you'll see that the bloom is now being applied across the lighter parts of this image here. Now if you want to adjust this effect, you need to load it up in the viewer just as you would a clip. Now the only trick here is that when you have a nested sequence and you double click on it, it won't load it up in the viewer, it'll just bring you into that nested sequence. So if you want to load that up to do an alteration on that bloom effect, you need to control click on it and open in viewer. it opens up the nested sequence. You can go into your filters and you can adjust the amount, bring that down a little bit, bring down the brightness, and just get that nice kind of glow across the top of the water. So that's quite a nice end result, the original being significantly different.